Now, Senator Angela Hill from Marion and Pearl River counties down towards my neck of the woods, chair of the County Affairs Senate Committee and vice chair of the Accountability, Efficiency, Transportation Senate Committees. Senator Hill, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
It took a minute to get through your intro, Senator. You're busy.
Yeah, I kind of stay busy. I kind of like it that way.
Well, it beats the heck out of sitting around wondering what to do next, definitely.
True. Well, there's always something to do.
Well, and especially right now, and the reason why we wanted to have you on this morning is to talk about something that has been a big topic right now that isn't necessarily a huge problem in Mississippi, but we want to keep it that way. It's been all over the news. Critical race theory being taught in schools. Just for people who aren't familiar with it, run through this very quickly about what this is.
Well, it's a Marxist concept that basically says that people are who they are because of their color, not their character. And it's just something that's permeated pretty much every aspect of the federal government, including the military. I had somebody last night tell me that it's all over some of the stuff that has to do with Keesler Air Force Base on the coast. So it's in the schools in different forms. Mississippi's adoption of socio-emotional learning standards is basically the open door for it in the state of Mississippi. The Castle Foundation is giving grants to individual schools to implement SEL is the acronym. And basically, Castle's definition of SEL is achieving equity, not equality, but that we're all equal, but achieving equity through social justice. And they emphasize in their training manuals and that, you know, these teachers are supposed to have equity monitors when they meet and record, you know, who talks too much, who interrupts each other on the basis of race and gender, which is just nuts, in my opinion.
Well, let me ask you this. I'm sorry. The definition that you gave, which was dead on, was accurate. Is that not institutionalized racism?
It absolutely is. I mean, it's like, you know, what they claim they're fighting, they're reinstituting.
And I guess it's the liberal mindset that I just can't relate to. How do you justify that? How do you say to make sure that no one is being persecuted based on the color of their skin, we're going to persecute other people based on the color of their skin? How does that even come about as a logical idea in anyone's mind?
Well, it's not logical, and the left is not logical. I've never found much logic in the things that the left promotes. And this is one of them. And it's just, you know, virtue signaling, but what they're doing is they're just inflicting more division. You know, this division did not exist in the country before all this wokeness came about. And, you know, people became labeled as oppressed and victims and labeled as the oppressor or the privileged. You know, that has just become so prevalent in the last, you know, several years with all the wokeness and the social justice warriors and dividing everybody and trying to define everything by race instead of character. And I think that's something that Martin Luther King would probably be rolling over in his grave if he saw, you know, how people are being defined today, rather, you know, on their color of their skin rather than their character and their merit.
Well, let me ask you something, and I want your opinion on this. We get told that this is the way things need to be, and this is what we have to do for, as you said, equity, not equality, but equity. Is this another case of a very vocal, ridiculously loud minority trying to impose their will on everybody else? Because I just don't get the feeling that the majority of people on both sides are having any buy-in for this.
Well, it is a minority, a loud vocal minority, but unfortunately, they have the right people on their side. They have the media to promote this. They have celebrities to promote this. They have a lot of money. They have big tech to promote this. So, you know, it is a minority of people pushing this, but they have all the resources to permeate it through society. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. And, you know, if you dare say anything in opposition, oh, well, you're a racist. But, you know, my folks that I grew up with and lived in this small town and went to school with, they know better. Look, when I graduated high school, we had 3 African Americans in the top 5 of my class, and they did not need any of this garbage to help them succeed. They did it on their own and on their own merits. And I think it's an insult to those people to bring this stuff into the classroom and to make people think that they are victims and that they are oppressed and that they can't succeed because the white oppressors are over here keeping them from succeeding. So it's not logical at all. It brings division. Younger kids, the younger you get the kids and you start teaching them this, I mean, it becomes, you're discipling these kids into this, made up world of, where you can't succeed or you're oppressed because of your color. And in the United States, unless you're severely handicapped in some kind of way, there's so much opportunity still in this country and in this state, no matter what color or creed you are. Look, there's people of color that are much more successful than I am, but it's because they worked and they made choices and they took risks and they became successful. So it's just something that people should not be afraid to talk about, and they should not be afraid to say, I want this garbage out of my kids' schools. I don't care how you're disguising it. We know what this is. We know this is a way to bring what they call transformative SEL and bring, a community of equity into the classrooms and to start defining people and recording meetings and who says what based on race and gender is just ridiculous.
Well, it is, and we have something on the C Spire text line that somebody texted in, a picture of a poster in a classroom down in southwest Mississippi, Anatomy of an Ally, and it's got different body parts, eyes to identify privilege, a nose to sniff out implicit bias. Okay. Now, number one, when we're in elementary school and we're using the word implicit in a sentence, I think we have gone off script a little bit.
Yeah, and all you're brainwashing these young kids, and it's disgusting, and it's sickening, and it needs to stop. And unfortunately, trying to stop it through the legislature is going to be a huge task. Parents need to go and look at what's in these kids' classrooms, just like the poster that somebody just texted you. If you don't think it's in these schools in Mississippi, you better start walking around and looking, because it's here in many different shapes, forms, and fashions. And it's going to be up to the parents to go to your kid's school and say, get this garbage out of my kid's school, get back to teaching academics, get off your social engineering, and teach my kid the academic standards that they need to succeed in whatever they choose to do. Don't teach them what attitudes they should have. That's my job as a parent.
Well, and let me ask you, because you just made the comment, said it would be a very hard task to get anything done about this through the legislature. Why is that?
Because people are afraid to face what's going on, and they're afraid to oppose anything that comes down from the Mississippi Department of Education. I mean, typically people are afraid of the educational establishment. And, because if you go against schools, then you hate children and you hate the public schools. That's kind of how you're defined if you oppose something that's going on in public schools. But I'm just the opposite. Teachers have enough to do without bringing all this stuff and having to be amateur psychologists to try to, reinvent what a child's values and what norms that they're supposed to accept and, relationships and, all this stuff that SEL brings into the classroom. The teachers don't have time to do this anyway, and they need to be able to focus on their content area and teach these kids the basic academic skills that they need to succeed.
Well, I think you put your thumb right on the pulse when you said this is the parents' job, not the school's job. But we have seen a trend over the years of taking more and more of the parents' responsibilities and trying to push them over into the teacher's lap instead. And this is, I think, part of the end result of that.
It is. And, I mean, people ridicule some of us when we oppose the Common Core standards. And, now that you look back, 10 or 11 years later after they were adopted, the United States has dropped 15 places in international math standards. The international math test, the United States dropped like a rock after Common Core was adopted. It's exactly what I predicted would happen. I also predicted that the minorities would be hurt the worst by Common Core, and that's exactly what happened across the country. You're called names if you come out and you think for yourself and you look at the research of where some of this stuff's coming from and what the real goal of Common Core was equity. That's all it was about, was equity. Doesn't matter how low the equity is, it was about equity. And this is the same thing with SEL. It's just taking time away from academics in the classroom and bringing all this social engineering junk in there. And they're using COVID as an excuse to do it, that these kids need all this social awareness and coddling and, all this, amateur psychology to be able to survive through what we had to survive for COVID. And we know that we have trained people that are available to...
Senator, we're up against the break. Can you hang on through the break?
Certainly.
Fantastic. Senator Angela Hill, we'll continue with her next on the Gallo studio, and on the guest line with us, Senator Angela Hill. And Senator, it's going to be difficult, as you said, to get something done in the legislature, but are we going to at least try to do something regarding critical race theory?
Well, several of us had resolutions filed this past session that died in committee. There's a few House members, and I had a resolution and a bill, and they died. But I think that maybe since this thing has kind of blown up nationally, people may be looking at it more next session than they have in the past. It's everywhere you look, and people are bringing it to other people's attention as to what they're seeing at work and what they're seeing at school. So, there may be a chance to do it. But, the governor said if we're not practicing it, we don't need it. If we are practicing it, we will need it. And it's going to take these individual people coming forth, like the poster that somebody texts you, to show that this stuff is in the schools, because it's in there in many different forms and fashions. And, self-reporting of what your kids are learning is probably one of the only ways that we're going to be able to determine where and when it's being taught, other than, looking and finding out if your school has one of these CASEL grants, or if they're, MDE approved this SEL back in the December, I think, or October of 20. And I know that Meridian School District, or one in Lauderdale County, had a big training session on it last week. So there's schools all over the state that are adopting SEL. And when they go into the materials that CASEL provides, you're going to find all this stuff about oppression, equity, individualism is bad, materialism, all this stuff that capitalism brings. One's oppressed, one's privileged. That's what they're teaching, and that's what CASEL's goal is. If you look at their website and you look at the papers, you look at the webinars that CASEL has produced, don't take my word for it. Go on the internet and look at it. They're out there with it. They're not ashamed of it, and that's what's being brought into your schools. And also these online resources that teachers are using, like Brain Pop. I think Ocean Springs just recently did not renew Brain Pop because of some of the leftist lessons that Brain Pop has. Learningforjustice.org is another resource that one teacher tried to use in one of the big school districts. And there are some boards that are looking more closely at what websites teachers are using, but it's very hard for them to even monitor what teachers are using when all this online learning. We used to could look at textbooks and say, we approve this or we don't. But when you have everybody on the internet, it's very hard to monitor, so parents are going to have to be looking at what their kids are being taught. Bring it to your school board's attention, bring it to your legislators' attention, because if you don't talk about it and let us know, everybody's not out there looking and seeing what, the educational establishment is doing. I kind of stay on top of it. Mississippi Professional Educators Journal, Winter 2020, Volume 32, Number 3, the whole cover of it is Mississippi's adoption of SEL standards. So it's right here in your MPE journal. They're proud of it. They think it's great. So dig into it, figure out that this is nothing but another leftist indoctrination tool. Schools are being offered grants through the CASEL Foundation to implement it. We have a big job ahead of us. We have to try to stay one step ahead, and unfortunately we're generally one step behind. But it is what it is, and people just need to know that if your kid's in public school, even private school, and you're paying taxes and you don't believe in all this, division and all this agenda of the left, then you need to get involved in your kid's school and find out what's going on and stop it.
Well, and you bring up a really good point, and I've made this before on other issues. When you say, and I was going to ask you, what did parents need to do to get involved, but you've already answered that question, and quite well. Talk to your school board, talk to your legislator, both of them, because here is the situation of our system. And I think you can speak to this and attest to this. The easiest way to get something done is to light up your elected officials. They need letters. They need phone calls, because you guys pay attention to that when you start getting a flood of messages from the voters explaining that they're upset and need to do something, and that can prompt action that might not otherwise be taken.
Yeah, I have opposed a lot of stuff that Mississippi Department of Education, Mississippi Board of Education has done from my position. But, I no longer have kids in school. I have a grandchild that's in public school, and I strongly oppose a lot of stuff that goes on in public school, because I have friends and family whose kids are in public school, and I'm very vocal about it. And, sometimes parents are afraid to say things because they're afraid that it will be taken out on their child. And unfortunately, there's some people in positions of authority that would take it out on your child. But, we're going to have to just be bold and be brave and say, I pay taxes. I pay for my child to get an academic education, not a social indoctrination education, and, take charge. I mean, these are the parents' school districts. They are the ones who pay taxes. They have the kids in the schools. And I believe that we still have a majority of Mississippians that don't believe in this foolishness. And, I even had a conversation with one of the Black Caucus members about this, several weeks back, and we talked about it. And he agreed with me that he thinks this is foolishness as well, and that there's no need for it, and that it's just making things worse.
And that leads into my question for you. In your opinion, what's the end game for this? What's the goal that they're working towards? If everything went the way of the people that are trying to put all of this into place in the schools, what would the end result be?
Lower and lower academic standards is one thing that's going to result from it, and just total chaos, and more Antifa type activists are going to come out of the school systems, because they're basically training these kids to be social justice warriors and to come out and be out there in protest and whatever. It's basically just making people mad and trying to move the agenda to the needle to the left, and using these kids as their weapons to do it and to get their agenda across. That's what they want. I mean, they want the United States to look like some of these other countries that, have gone down to nothing and become ruled by despots. And I mean, it's the Marxist ideology. There's a playbook out there, and it's being played letter by letter by the leftists that are running the public education establishment from the top down. And it's not hard to see that it's the same thing that's played out in other countries. And once you get it into the school systems and you get this, Marxist ideology drilled into the heads of these kids, I mean, you're going to eventually change the country from a free country to a Marxist nation. And that's the goal of these people. It's
power through chaos. That's what they're looking for.
It absolutely is, and unfortunately some of these administrators and people that are working in the school systems, they don't even realize what the end goal of this stuff is, and that's how it gets brought in. It's all packaged up in something that sounds really sweet and nice and helpful to the children, but when you dig into the core of it, it's vile and it's garbage.
And you have to look at, and that's why I asked that question, you have to look at the results of it. Don't look at the immediate aspect of it that's in front of you. Oh, this sounds nice. Yes, we need to all come together. Wait a minute. Where is this headed? That's the question that I think sometimes we don't ask often enough.
Yeah, I mean, you need to look at the people who are pushing the policy. That's all you need to do is follow the money and follow the leaders of the people that are pushing the policy. If you look at the CEO of Castle, you look at the webinars that they've produced, you look at the white papers that they produce, you go to their website, you look at how they approach these learning standards that MDE has already adopted, then you will see what their goal is. It is not rocket science to figure this stuff out.
Well, but you've got to be paying attention, and you've got to be willing to speak up, which is, it sounds to me like what you're advocating for. Yeah,
I'm trying. I want to preserve the wonderful country that we have. And, Mississippi is a wonderful state. I don't want Mississippi to go into the doldrums of chaos and mess like some of these other states have seen. We've been able to keep this craziness and all this stuff out of Mississippi as far as, people just wanting to, burn somebody's building down because they're mad at somebody else. None of that makes any sense. And, we need to just stay above the fray in Mississippi and continue to be civil.
You going to be proposing any other resolutions in the next session?
Yeah, I absolutely will. I will be proposing some more resolutions and some more bills as well. I mean, they're also trying to rewrite history to teach children that this country is based on racism and that's what the founding principles of the country are, is racism. And that's wrong. I mean, we know why people left and came across the pond, and it had nothing to do with racism. It had to do with despots ruling them.
Senator Angela Hill, we appreciate your time, and keep us up to date on how this fight is going, because I'm afraid it's not going